Good afternoon, and welcome once again to this week's presentation uh, regarding Bank of America, the data patterns, and a Capstone update. The objective of this week's discussion is going to be to obtain and analyze some data, both financial and external, that pertains to Bank of America, and applying everything that we've learned throughout this week. No, sorry, this month. We're going to present those findings and the correlations between the data and external factors to see exactly how everything is interconnected. And lastly, going to perform a SWOT analysis for Bank of America. We'll just define that a little bit and then go into the details, and also take a look at the future moving forward. I picked Bank of America because it is the Capstone company that I'm working with. It also happens to be the company I work for, which does give me a little bit of inside knowledge into the way that they have been doing things over the past several years. We're also going to take a look at the data analysis, the data that that I gathered and how it was looked at. And then, of course, go over the full SWOT analysis and how that can be applied to future benefits and growth for the company as a whole. Now, the data that was collected is straightforward. 2 years of historic stock figures from 8/29/2018 through 8/29 of 2020. Did those dates because 8/29/2020 is the date that I retrieved the data from Yahoo Finance. Also, some market information about external factors, things along the lines of whether they're social or political factors, or even things like the pandemic and so on. Also, the company vision and how that translates into profitability. Company vision, of course, is responsible growth, and with a focus on making the financial lives of the clients better through the power of every connection. Now, those connections are technological. Those connections are also through the people in their financial centers, and of course, through the profitability that translates back to the stockholders and shareholders of the company. The value of this data is a bit difficult to quantify because most of this data is used for internal purposes, and it's not the kind of data that would necessarily be um, transferable on the open market. It wouldn't necessarily hold a value to another company unless there was a full acquisition of Bank of America itself. And then, of course, that value becomes that data becomes invaluable because it helps you to decipher the public perception of the company, but also gives you an idea of where the sentiment is heading, which is useful for future planning and benefits for the company as a whole. When looking at the data, the value over the course of the time analyzed remained mostly steady with the exception of the drop back in March of 2020. Now, of course, that particular price drop happened due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the way interest rates changed. So we'll take a look at the correlation there in just a minute. The variability and the volatility of this stock were both in line with current market conditions over the past several years. Markets have fluctuated quite wildly due to the rebound after the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And the stock value changes did occur with interest rate changes, not wildly because it brought in new clients and new customers in the form of like auto loans and home loans as interest rates were dropping. So there was a balancing act that happened between both the interest rates decreasing, but also a gain in client share. So therefore, less of an impact as one would think. And then, of course, the public perception did fluctuate over this time, and it was in line with the pandemic response. So we'll take a look at those different factors that weighed in on that response there. As far as data clustering, there was not any real clear clustering that happened with this data. Nothing really stood out because the data was following the industry expected fluctuations with the market. There was no real big changes in sentiment because it did remain consistent with the company value statement for their current planning phase. And that being said, the clients see the benefit of Bank of America products and services, and therefore they stick with them. The more of the financial life that is being handled by Bank of America, the more likely a client is to stick around. And so therefore, as these different changes happen, as these different external factors hit, we didn't see a wild change in the value of the stock or the value of the company itself. That being said, those things are correlated over the past couple of years with um, these different external factors. Like for instance, here we see in approximately in March of 2020, a big drop from the mid 30s to sub $20 per share, and that was the correlation between the the pandemic and interest rate drops, and also the stock price itself. We also saw another drop back towards the end of 2018, which is pretty much what we were, we saw a drop in a lot of different market factors at that point in time. And it did have to do with lowering interest rates and not being a real big, heavy time to purchase homes. And so therefore we saw a little drop in that interest business as well. The stock price and the company public value changed correlated to the interest changes. So that goes without saying. We saw a little bit of a rebound as more of the business did pick up, but the biggest impact had to do with, of course, the pandemic changes. The stock price and company value change was a temporal correlation because it was time sensitive. It wasn't necessarily over a period, it was specific to a period in time. Also, of course, the price and interest falling is correlated to the pandemic response. Same thing was temporal correlation, as it was a specific period of time and it wasn't over a range of time. Uh, and likewise, there was no perceived coincidental correlation in the data analyzed because normal fluctuations aside, the data did seem to have a correlated effect on the stock price. As far as social network analysis goes, I took a look at both Facebook and Twitter, and the things that could have possibly impacted had to do with the PPP loan rollout as a part of the CARES package that Congress passed. Also, there was an online banking error issue where people were seeing their values in their accounts showing zero, even though they knew they had funds there. And of course, interest rate changes. These were all different things that, or situations that showed up on both the Facebook and the Twitter timeline as comments from clients. However, it didn't really seem to have much of an effect on the stock price. And so, even though there were these issues that showed up and these changes in the world, the stock price still followed along suit with much of the financial sector and the stock fluctuations and volatility. As far as optimization and risk reduction, when it comes to planning for a pandemic, interest rate changes, and the public perception, really the biggest piece of advice here is just to be prepared overall and have the portfolio of business in such a place that it can withstand these types of changes. Things like pandemic and interest rate changes, these things are not normal everyday occurrences. So therefore they are situations that can't really be planned for outside of making sure that as a company they are sensitive to their clients' needs and how these different types of scenarios do impact the clients themselves. That being said, the data is taking us in the direction of the stock prices rebounding, the company becoming more profitable as we see more of that business. Even though interest rates are lower, we see more of the bounce back from the markets as a whole as the pandemic starts to wane down and the economy starts to open back up and go back to business as usual. And that brings us to our SWOT analysis. Very simply, SWOT is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. These are the different areas we're going to take a look at. First one is going to be strengths. Bank of America has a very high value brand. It's very well known, and that is definitely one of the things that helps strengthen it in the marketplace. They have a diversified product and service offering. They offer everything from mortgages to auto loans, credit cards, financial investment products. Both domestic and international presence in the financial industry. We're going to take a little bit more about that because that also is something that does hamper them slightly as well. And then, of course, they have a growth strategy that minimizes risk. This is their responsible growth strategy, which helps them to remain more nimble and focus more on what's going to make the company profitable without being a burden. Also, then we take a look at the weaknesses. they are highly dependent on the domestic products for their profitability. Only in the consumer space, they just don't have anything that's an international product that's consumer oriented. They are heavily reliant on the fintech trends. They are constantly looking at what is new in the financial technology world and trying to capitalize on it. And that is where a lot of their efforts have been placed recently. They have had reputational damage due to the previous financial crisis, the way it was handled. Some of that is, unwarranted towards the company as a whole, and some of it is warranted, and they are still trying to pull back that issue. As far as opportunities are concerned, um, one of the biggest opportunities is the expansion of consumer products into foreign markets. This is an area they just haven't tapped on. Acquiring competing fintech products as opposed to trying to develop them themselves. And then innovation of current technology, both internal and external, giving it better tools for both the associates and the clients. As far as threats are concerned, competition by fintech-only financial organizations. We take a look at like Capital One and their banking model without having many physical branches that lowers their overhead. Financial markets crises and recessions. Those are obviously factors that are difficult for a company to plan for, but they threaten any financial business. Then, of course, regulations on consumer data and financial services. As the government does more in the way of regulations, it requires the company to change the way that they work and function to better suit that. As far as recommendations go, would be to explore expansion into global consumer markets, as this is an untapped potential for Bank of America. To expand their financial tools to consumers, to give consumers more control over their financial lives, and they need to train the associates to teach the consumers to use these tools. And then, of course, stop relying on cost minimizations to increase profits. These other previous recommendations would go in the way of helping to increase profits by giving new financial revenue streams to the company and make clients more sticky. In conclusion, Bank of America is currently a very solid company, lots of growth potential, and of course a risk of loss to fintech firms. So using the recommendations previously given will help Bank of America to minimize these risks by allowing them to compete against the lower costs because they'll be in the same sector, and also give them the ability to adapt faster with their vast resources than a lot of their competition. Thank you again, and have a great day.